Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I didn't even have a name tag, just a white chef's coat, a badge clipped to my waistband, and instructions to observe quietly from the service console. I wasn't supposed to speak, serve, or even breathe too loudly. That's what they told me. Just in case we need pastry support, they said. What a joke. My name's Olivia Hart. I'm 32. I live in Seattle. I've been the head pastry chef at the Faircrest Grand for 6 years. My father, Raymond Hart, is the general manager of the entire hotel. To most people, he's smooth as glass. But I know the cracks, especially the ones that split when I show up in the room. Tonight was a closed-door diplomatic dinner. Big stuff. American and Chinese reps brokering a billion-dollar shipping deal. No press, no cameras, just power, suits, and 10 courses of perfectly plated ego. Before we start, how's your day going and where are you joining from? I was stationed at the back wall like a spare fork. No chair, no plate, no purpose. The servers were prepped, the food was flawless, and my only job was to be invisible, which is exactly how my father prefers me. He brushed past me before the first course, barely making eye contact. Remember, he said under his breath, you're here for support. That's all. I gave a nod I didn't mean. Things went smoothly until dessert service. A toast was scheduled. Everyone turned toward the Chinese delegation as an older man in a deep blue suit stood with a raised glass. That's when it all snapped. He started speaking, not in standard Mandarin, but in a slow, rhythmic dialect I hadn't heard in over 10 years. My spine locked. I knew it instantly. Xianbei Regional Mountain Inflection. I'd learned it from the baker who taught me to fold mooncakes in a remote village in Gansu. The hired interpreter went pale. His headset buzzed, but nothing came out. One of the American CEOs leaned toward his translator, confused. Another fumbled with his earpiece. The Chinese reps stayed silent, eyes locked on their speaker. The room was still. My heart slammed. I waited 2 beats. No one moved. Then I stepped forward. My father whipped his head around. Olivia, he hissed. Don't! I ignored him. I reached the center of the room, turned toward the Americans, and said clearly, he's beginning with a proverb. In long silence, old debts wait to speak. The room turned toward me like I'd lit a match. The Chinese speaker, CEO Chen, paused. Then he nodded. In Mandarin, he said calmly, she will translate for me. The interpreter raised a hand, confused. My father stepped forward, red rising in his face. Sir, if I may? CEO Chen waved him off. She heard me. I said what I meant. The room watched me, every eye, every breath. My father stood frozen behind me. I stood taller and said, please continue. And he did. CEO Chen spoke slowly, deliberately, with the weight of someone who expected to be misunderstood. I took one small step to his side, just enough to place myself behind him but in line with the front table. I kept my chin level and my hands at my sides. I wasn't the chef anymore, not in that moment. I was his voice. He says, I began, this agreement is not just numbers. It's ghosts that got their attention. Chen kept going. I stayed close enough to hear but far enough to be separate. He spoke in long phrases, each sentence building on the last like stacked stone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He says, I translated, when a river is dammed too quickly, the fish die, not from pressure, but from silence. One of the Americans, the younger vice president from the Texas firm, nodded slightly, like the words were finally making sense. Chen talked about ports, but in metaphors, about ancestors, but in business terms. Every phrase was wrapped in history. I matched his tone exactly, not just the words, but the rhythm, the meaning underneath. He says the land remembers who listened, and who only waited to speak, that one landed. The U.S. trade envoy straightened up. I could feel the shift. They were finally hearing him, not just decoding him, but hearing. Chen paused and glanced at me, a faint nod. Barely there, but I caught it. Then I heard the shuffle of dress shoes behind me. Olivia, my father said, voice low and sharp. That's enough. Let the translator resume? I didn't move. I kept my eyes on Chen. He looked past me, right at my father, and said something crisp in Mandarin. I took a breath and translated without flinching. Efficiency must respect legacy. My father froze. His mouth stayed open, like he had something else locked and loaded. But he never said it. Chen kept going. He spoke of debt, not money, but honor. He mentioned a forgotten port where American investors once pulled out, years ago, leaving locals bankrupt. He mentioned names, dates. He said, "We do not forget, but we do forgive, if the terms show respect." He says, I told the Americans, this is not just a deal. It's a reckoning silence. The air felt heavy. You could hear forks being set down. A water glass clinked as someone's hand shook. These men in $1,000 suits, used to dominating rooms, were sitting still, listening. Chen finished his glass of baijiu and gave a small bow toward the American side. Then he said one final line, softer than the rest. I understood it the second he said it, but I didn't repeat it. It wasn't meant for the room. He said, "Only those trained in silence know when to speak." I kept it to myself. My father stood back, red creeping into his collar, watching a room he thought he ran lean toward someone else, toward me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stepped back one pace and folded my hands in front of me. The toast was over, but something way bigger had just begun. After the room broke into applause, after the diplomats shook hands and the cameras cooled down, I knew exactly where my head went. Back to that hotel ballroom in Chicago 2 years earlier. I was standing under a chandelier the size of a Volkswagen, holding a stupid-looking plaque shaped like a chef's knife. The guy from the Department of Agriculture smiled for the photos like I'd saved the whole damn country. In a way, I kinda had. I'd cracked a food safety threat that no one else even saw coming. Shipments flagged for contamination were getting waved through customs because the red flags were buried in the language. Obscure dialects tucked inside digital shipping manifests. Not just one dialect either. Layers of misdirection, Southern inflection written in simplified script with phonetic spellings from the Northwest provinces. It was deliberate, hidden in plain sight. Customs missed it. Local inspectors missed it. Corporate supply chain teams missed it. I didn't. I caught it by accident, flipping through an old folder from my time in Gansu, recipe logs mixed with pronunciation guides. The tone markers didn't match the contents on a dessert shipment. I flagged it, cross-checked the other cargo lists, and by the end of the week, I had connected enough dots to trigger a federal freeze. No deaths, no illness. Nothing ever made it to a plate. Because of me. A month later, I got the award. National recognition. Quiet ceremony. 14 people clapping. My name printed in a press release none of my coworkers even read. And my father? He showed up halfway through the speech, stood in the back, and clapped twice when they handed me the plaque. After the ceremony, he caught up with me outside the restroom. That was his moment. "You handled yourself well," he said. I blinked. "Thanks." He looked at the plaque tucked under my arm like it was a joke prize from summer camp. Then he added, "But don't confuse applause with leadership. Being clever isn't being in charge." I remember that line exactly, like a fingerprint burned into glass. I didn't argue, I just nodded, walked back to my table, and never brought the medal up again. Not with him. That was the moment I knew for sure. He'd never see what I was made of. Not because I wasn't capable, but because I was fluent in something he didn't understand. Quiet, detail, precision. He led with posture, presence. That voice he practiced in the mirror, the one that turned no into a strategy. And me? I led with timing, with silence, with questions that made people pause, not rush to respond. He didn't get it, and I stopped waiting for him to. But that didn't mean I was done. It just meant I had to work smarter than ever, because no matter how much I achieved, my last name would always walk into the room before I did, and it never brought a chair for both of us. The assistant F&B director slot opened up the week after the Chicago conference. I didn't hesitate. I submitted my application the same night they posted it. Resume, portfolio, letters from 2 senior chefs, even the cost breakdown of last quarter's menu redesign I helped lead. I knew I was qualified. Everybody in that kitchen knew I was qualified. 3 weeks passed. Nothing. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. Private message from Kelly in HR. "You didn't hear this from me, but your file vanished mid-review, disappeared from the candidate portal." I froze in the prep hallway, phone still in hand, shoes soaked from rinsing the pastry floor. I messaged her back. "Vanished how?" She replied in seconds, pulled before final review. Decision note says, "Excellent technical mind, not suited for frontline leadership." Then a screenshot. At the bottom of the file was the name that hit me like a shovel to the ribs. Raymond Hart, my father. The hotel's general manager had vetoed my application before the committee even met. He didn't even bother to tell me, just yanked the file and moved on like it was a spoiled bottle of wine. I stared at that screenshot for 5 minutes without blinking. That's when I realized something even worse. This wasn't the first time. I started digging. I stayed late in the staff office after closing, clicking through old logs and deleted folders. I cross-referenced my project submissions with the leadership change tracker. I pulled up emails I'd forwarded to him that never got replies, notes from culinary innovation sessions that never made it into the meeting minutes. I found timestamps, attachments, trackbacks. I found proposals I'd worked on for weeks, quietly flagged archived within 24 hours of submission, always by the same admin account, his account. There was one proposal for a cross-cultural chef exchange program I'd built from scratch. Research, budget, full pilot design. It was logged, opened, and removed the same day. No comment, no review notes, just gone. Another one was for a weekend pastry immersion class open to local students. I'd even done a cost-benefit sheet showing community outreach and projected bookings, flagged and deleted. And then I found the one that really got me, a client commendation email from a 5-star wedding where the bride had written a full paragraph about how my team saved the reception from a scheduling disaster. The note had been forwarded to the executive suite by catering, but when I checked the metadata on the file in the staff recognition folder, my name had been stripped out before it was archived. Every time I stood out, he erased the part that pointed to me. I printed copies of everything: screen grabs, metadata logs, sender trails. I created a backup folder at home labeled Quiet Corner, password protected. I made 3 versions: cloud, flash, and hard drive. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood the game. My father didn't just underestimate me, he actively made sure no one else could see me rise. So I stopped asking why and started gathering receipts. I didn't learn how to speak by talking. I learned in a village called Hongkou, tucked in the hills of Gansu, where the internet barely reached and the only oven was a coal-fired box welded together by hand. I was 24, broke, bullheaded, and too stubborn to quit the culinary exchange program even after the other 2 interns bailed the first week. The man I trained under was Master Liang. He never smiled, never praised, barely looked at me most days. He spoke a dialect I'd never heard before, with thick mountain tones and clipped syllables. There was no textbook, no formal instruction. If I wanted to learn, I had to shut up and watch. He didn't explain the dough textures or filling ratios. He just showed me once, sometimes twice. Then he expected me to try. If I got it wrong, he didn't correct me. He'd take my tray, dump the batch, and start over. No words. But the rhythm taught me more than any lecture. He mixed by feel, waited for the air to shift, listened to the dough breathe when he rolled it out. I started doing the same. I paid attention to how long he paused between steps, how he leaned in just slightly before brushing sugar onto the red bean pastries. Everything had a purpose, even the silence. The neighbors helped me fill in the blanks. Old women who cooked with their elbows, who handed me tea while mumbling phrases that didn't always match their words. "You must listen with your chest," one of them said, "not just your ears." By month 2, I could understand full conversations. By month 5, I could speak clearly enough that the postman stopped laughing when I signed for packages. When I got back to the States and enrolled in culinary school, I tried to explain some of it during a class on regional desserts. Talked about flavor intention, mouthfeel structure, pause timing. A guy in the back snorted and said, "You sound like a fortune cookie." The class laughed. Even the instructor smiled. That was the last time I explained anything. After that, I just let my work do the talking. I'd bring in layered sponge cakes with embedded salt swirls, almond candies with timed release textures. I'd watch them eat without saying a word. Every once in a while, someone would look up like they just had a thought they couldn't name. That's when I knew they heard me. That dialect, the one no one thought mattered, is the same one that shut down $1 billion room in silence, the same one that taught me how to watch, how to wait, how to know when the moment is mine. I don't shout to be heard, I don't rush to be noticed, but when I speak, people listen. 3 days before the banquet, I got a flagged message in my inbox marked confidential, language advisory, internal use only. It was from hotel operations, not my department. I almost deleted it, thinking it was a policy update, but I clicked it. The memo was short, clipped, and clearly not meant for general eyes. It warned that CEO Chen might choose to deliver remarks in a non-standard dialect, not covered in the simultaneous translation software. The phrasing was careful, like someone had sat on the language for half an hour before hitting send. Beneath that, in bold, this may be used as a cultural loyalty signal. Interpreters are advised to defer if unfamiliar. That was it. No instructions, no follow-up, just a warning. 10 minutes later, I got the second memo. It came through the chain but was clearly meant for me. Same formatting, different tone. I was encouraged to attend in a culinary support capacity, but was not to engage with any language-related issues unless directly requested by senior leadership. I scrolled to the bottom and saw it. Raymond Hart, General Manager. He knew. Of course he knew. I didn't need to guess. He'd seen my resume, heard me speak it at a hotel conference 5 years ago when I guided a vendor through a customs dispute. He knew I understood that dialect inside and out. And still, he'd rather let a billion-dollar deal fall apart than let me be the one to hold the room together. I didn't reply, didn't storm into his office, didn't send a reply all or print out receipts from the quiet corner folder. I just started preparing. I pulled out my old Gansu notebooks and laid them across the pastry counter after close. Every night, after my shift ended and the staff went home, I turned the flour-splattered prep station into a dialect lab. I drilled phrasing, not just vocabulary, phrases for negotiation, phrases for honor, for legacy, for saving face without losing power. I whispered sentences over and over until the timing matched memory. I layered the tone like sugar on a hot tart, quick enough to stick, slow enough to settle. I even practiced Chen's name, both in the formal standard pronunciation and the dialect-specific version I'd heard 1,000 times in rural bakeries when someone mentioned him like a living myth. By the second night, my hands moved automatically, kneading dough while my mouth worked through phrases like, with full respect to history, and this moment carries more than numbers. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't angry. I was ready. And I made a quiet decision right then. If the moment came, I wouldn't wait. Not for a nod, not for a signal, not for my father's permission. I wouldn't speak to prove anything. I wouldn't speak to be seen. I'd speak because the moment would ask for it. And I'd answer. The banquet room smelled like citrus-polished wood and fear. I was posted at the far end, right beside the exit doors, stationed at a brushed steel service console with a headset I didn't need and a clipboard no one expected me to use. My chef's coat was crisp, clean, and utterly unnecessary. I wasn't here to work. I was here to be looked past. Chen's motorcade pulled up right on time. I watched through the glass as he stepped out, flanked by aides in tailored dark suits. One of them looked about 30, sharp eyes scanning the entrance like he was logging every face. Chen walked like a man who never had to rush, chin forward, hands loose, like the room adjusted to his timing, not the other way around. As they passed the reception table, his gaze flicked, 1 second, maybe 2, straight to me. Not a smile, not a nod, just a look. But it landed. A few paces behind him, the aide said something in standard Mandarin. Quiet, but not to be missed. Not everyone forgets their roots. I didn't react. Guests filled the room, wine poured, plates were lifted, cleared, and replaced in clockwork silence. The American side smiled too much. The Chinese side smiled too little. Everyone was pretending to be comfortable. Main course ended. Dessert hadn't dropped yet. The head U.S. negotiator tapped his fork to his glass. Let's begin. Chen rose, calm as ever, glass in hand. He started in Mandarin, basic, practiced phrases. Diplomatic thanks, ceremonial nods. The interpreter kept pace, half a second behind him, feeding the American side clean, rehearsed lines. Then Chen stopped, held his glass higher, and shifted into the dialect. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, but I felt it hit like a dropped plate. The syllables changed, the cadence snapped tighter, the vowels bent just enough to throw off the rhythm. I saw it happen in real time. The interpreter froze. His screen glitched. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gulping air. A tech guy leaned forward from the side with a spare headset, like that would fix anything. Guests looked around, fumbling with their earpieces. Nobody moved to help. Not a single voice filled the gap. I stood. From the back corner, quietly but clearly, I stepped forward. My father turned just enough to see me out of the corner of his eye. "Don't," he hissed, barely audible. I kept walking, one foot, then the next. I didn't rush, didn't break pace, didn't even flinch when my heels clicked across the polished floor. I reached the open space just behind Chen and said, steady as a flat blade. He says, when silence is chosen, not forced, it becomes power. The room stilled. Chen paused, looked at me, then nodded once. He kept speaking, turning just slightly toward the U.S. delegation. I translated as he went, smooth, accurate, clean. Not just the words, but the tempo, the intent, the balance between grace and fire. He moved through history, pride, wounds never named but clearly understood. He says, a hand extended in remembrance holds more than one stretched for profit. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. Behind me, I could feel my father's presence, tight, still, stuck in the middle of a plan he couldn't control. Chen never broke stride. He says, those who pretend not to hear should not be shocked when others speak without warning. The American lead cleared his throat, sat up straighter. One by one, heads turned toward Chen and me. The interpreter didn't move, security didn't step in, and my father didn't say another word, because this time, no one stopped me. The next morning, my phone started buzzing before sunrise. Corporate press release, internal newsletter, meeting recap. Every headline bragged the same thing. Flawless execution. Unprecedented cultural harmony. A masterclass in diplomacy. Photos of the banquet were everywhere. Chen raising a glass. American execs smiling like they'd planned it all themselves. Not one line mentioned me, not one. I skimmed every email again, just to be sure. No culinary liaison, no on-site interpreter, no acknowledgement that someone had even spoken during that toast. Just vague praise for team cohesion and cross-departmental support. I opened the internal draft file, checked the version history, and there it was. My name had been in the first version, as a line item under critical in-room support, deleted in the second version. Final edit logged at 11:32 p.m. by R. Hart. He didn't even wait a full day, just scrubbed it out before morning. That night, I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and pulled up the folder I'd been building for months. Project Quiet Corner, the digital graveyard of every time I'd been silenced, sidestepped, or deleted. I laid it all out. Blocked proposals, stripped author tags, meeting minutes where I'd been present but not recorded, commendation emails forwarded to senior staff with my name quietly cut out. Even the personnel review where someone had written, lacks executive energy, with no reviewer's signature, until I checked the file info. Guess who logged the last edit? It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. He hadn't just overlooked me. He'd made a full-time job out of keeping me small. I printed everything. I loaded it onto a flash drive and backed it up twice. The next afternoon, I scheduled a quiet meeting. Off-property, neutral location, just a coffee shop near the waterfront. She walked in right on time. Vanessa Chu, corporate labor counsel from compliance. Blazer, flats, no pleasantries. She opened her folder. What are we discussing? I handed her the file. She scrolled without speaking for 5 minutes straight. Her mouth tightened as she read. I said nothing until she looked up. Then I said, clear and level, I'm not asking for revenge. I just won't be erased again. She nodded once and closed the folder. This stays between us for now, she said. But it's enough to start. I stood, paid for her coffee, and walked out. No anger, no victory rush. Just air in my lungs that hadn't been there in years. The investigation didn't come with warning lights or big announcements. It started quiet. Just a calendar hold labeled review session, internal use. No one got reassigned. No one got walked out. For 2 weeks, everything looked normal on the surface. Meetings, banquets, clean white tablecloths. But the air shifted. People started watching each other more closely. The first woman came forward on day 4. Former sous chef had transferred to another property 5 years ago. She submitted emails, proposal drafts she'd submitted through Hart's office that were lost in transition, then reused 6 months later with someone else's name on them. Day 6, it was a catering coordinator. Still worked in the hotel, still smiled through every wedding. She described a pattern of being told she lacked polish. Anytime she pitched a new client strategy, all her notes were kept. None were credited. Then came a former assistant GM, fired 2 years earlier due to restructuring. She submitted an exit interview log where she'd reported Hart's dismissive behavior toward female staff. The file had never been uploaded to her personnel folder. All of it pointed back to him. Not rage, not harassment, just a steady surgical erasure of women who made him feel small. I never raised my voice, I just kept submitting proof. Every time someone came forward, corporate compliance looped me in quietly, no fanfare. Just a received thank you and a new folder link. Then someone from the old executive suite dropped the match. It was a low-quality audio file from 4 years ago, recorded during a retreat in Scottsdale. Hart was speaking casually over drinks. The voice was undeniably his. "She's good," he said, laughing, "but I can't let her stand above me. Not my own daughter." That was it. Not cruel, just cold. Like it was common sense. He didn't deny it. No grand defense, no email blast, no emergency meeting. He walked into the HR office the next morning and resigned. No speech, no press, just silence. He cleared his office before lunch. The corner suite where he'd ruled from behind glass went dark by 3 p.m. People whispered. Some looked shocked, some didn't. The executive director posted a vague staff bulletin about new leadership transitions and deep appreciation. But the staff knew. The tide had shifted, and they knew who turned it. I didn't gloat, didn't high-five anyone, didn't even mention it out loud. I went back to work. Piped buttercream onto lemon tarts, reviewed supply logs, took a late call from the bakery vendor in Tacoma. But that night, I sat in the locker room 10 minutes longer than usual. Not because I was tired, but because, for the first time, I wasn't holding my breath. I didn't feel like I had to stand straighter, speak more carefully, prove anything just to exist inside the walls of that hotel. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel erased. I just felt still and fully seen. 2 weeks later, the offer came in quiet. No ceremony, no welcome committee. Just an email from corporate leadership with the subject line, "Proposal, Internal Advancement Opportunity." Attached was a letter. They wanted me to lead a new role they were building from scratch. Director of Cross-Cultural Culinary Development. I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't post. I didn't call my mother. I just clicked accept and went back to my shift. They gave me a small office upstairs, tucked behind what used to be the accounting floor. Windows overlooked the freight docks. Not pretty, but honest. I hung one thing on the wall behind my desk. A map of China, yellowed at the edges, with one red pin stuck in a tiny mountain town called Hongkou. Day 1, I met with the new team. 4 young chefs, 2 translators, and a supply manager who looked ready to bolt until I handed her a pastry box. I told them, "We're not here to shout our culture. We're here to learn how to hear others." That landed. One guy nodded like I'd just answered a question he hadn't known how to ask. We got to work. The first training focused on silence, how to read meaning without translation. A plate served 5 seconds too early. A tea glass refilled too fast. These things speak louder than language. That night, after everyone cleared out, I sat at my desk and opened the bottom drawer to stash some papers. Inside was a plain white envelope, no name on the front, just thick paper folded once. It was his handwriting. I opened it. "Keep going farther." That was all it said. No apology, no explanation, no signature. I stared at it for a long minute. Not mad, not moved, just still. Then I folded it shut, slid it back in the drawer, and closed it. Not for closure. But because I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need to be louder. I didn't need to be approved. That corner I was shoved into, it became the clearest seat in the house.